You guys ready, Miriam, Olivia? So good morning.
Good morning.
I don't even know what month it is anymore. This is May.
This is May.
May,
May.
CTB Rail and Transit Subcommittee. Glad to have everybody here like that in the audience today. That's a little unusual for us. I wanted to start, everybody sees that they've got a notebook and things look a little different. So I want to introduce one of the newest members of our team, and that is Sheila Beard. And she has the horrible task of trying to keep me straight, which is a full-time plus overtime job these days. But she comes to us with a wealth of experience working for different executives and boards around the Commonwealth. Before now, in education and in healthcare, she came to us because she was interested in what we're doing in transportation. So she's getting us all more organized. So you'll see emails coming from Sheila or through Carol to get you materials in advance of the meetings. You can just leave these here today, and she'll make sure that we get recharged in advance of every subcommittee.
Look forward to working with you. We noticed the color coordination between you and the boss.
We're in sync. Last week we were all brightly colored. This week it's black.
It's the little things.
So she's fantastic. We also have a couple of, well, Miriam Foster is running our tech along with Mary Olivia Rentner. Mary Olivia is new to us as well in our communications team. So
Welcome.
we'll see some new faces.
Better year old than me.
They keep things running smoothly for us. So with that, there is no environmental committee meeting. I think some of our friends from the environmental side are back there joining us early. So we've got a little bit more flexibility schedule-wise today. We do have a couple presentations, so we'll be able to dig into that rail plan presentation a little more than we have the last couple of meetings. So with that, let's dive into the agenda. Approval of the April 19th minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're all good. Okay. I'll move on, jump into.
By the way, thank you for
director's-
having a little bit more thorough minutes. I think this is a much improved.
Again, I would like to Sheila. Thank you for taking care of that for us. Okay, so director's report, CTB agenda today for us is pretty light. We just have a rail industrial access project that Linda will brief you on later today. Other than that, it's pretty light month for us. On the rail side, our rail planning team is wrapping up the Roanoke to Clifton Forge multimodal connection study. This was a legislatively mandated study to look at making a better connection between the train station in Roanoke and the train station in Clifton Forge. We'll give you an update at the subcommittee next month of the contents of that study and what the recommendations are.
And you all are aware that there once was such a
Yes,
bus
yes.
a long time ago.
So we'll bring that back to you next month. On the transit side, it's a big news morning
Big news. It is.
for WMATA.
Yes, it is.
It's a big news
Did you
morning.
hear it coming down?
No, it was on the morning.
Oh,
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
So there was an issue with train operator certifications that came out late on Sunday that impacted service not in Virginia, but so much that on some of the other lines that went into effect yesterday. There was another issue that came out of the Metro Rail Safety Commission this morning. Had something on that last night. But about 9 o'clock last night, it was released that Paul Wiedefeld, who has served the agency well, was slated to retire at the end of June, is left effective today, along with the chief operating officer. The deputy GM is standing in. They've named a new GM, Randy Clark, who's coming from Austin, Texas. Has a lot of energy, very innovative guy. He does have rail experience. He worked for MBTA in Boston. He's worked for the American Public Transportation Association. He's very dynamic. So he'll be here in June, towards the end of June, but he's got a lot on his plate. I think it's just important to note that we're continuing to work with them, partner with them, make sure that we're following through on the investments the Commonwealth is making and holding Metro accountable to the extent that we're able to do that. So this morning.
How was the discussion at the Northern Virginia Forum? Did this come up?
I'm sorry?
Did this come up at the Northern Virginia forum?
I actually didn't attend this.
Just how much, in round numbers, how much money does Commonwealth put in the model a year?
So it varies year to year. 46.5% of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund goes to the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission for WMATA. That's capital and operating. So that's of the overall transit program, almost half. And then we also have the dedicated capital funding that is really drawn off of a myriad of regional funding sources that goes. That varies, but it's at least 154.5 million. Here is our share. We send them 50 million match for PREA funding. It's considerable.
This comes at a very difficult time too.
And what representation does the Commonwealth have on that
That's
board?
where so the governor appoints one member of the WMATA board, and currently that is Paul Smedberg. Anyway, the Commonwealth has one representative, and our representative is currently the board chair. So we're well positioned and have, a great line of communication to know what's going on.
Scott, since you're picked up that way, I mean, despite all these challenges, one after another that's come up lately, you think we're basically okay with that?
I would not
say
answer
that-
that.
There's been a continuing series of situations that would cause the riding public to lose faith in the system, just being very blunt. And the latest being that half of the operators were not certified to operate.
Right.
It's
It
shocking
just
that it
makes
could
no
occur.
sense.
Yeah, and again, when it was determined that they actually put 250 on furlough while they wait for their certifications, it's shocking that that could occur with the level of scrutiny that's been applied to this transit system.
I think the flip side is their ridership, albeit still way down from pre-pandemic levels, is 40% above their budget projections. So, people are coming back to the system. We need them to be successfable.
We need
We
that.
need
They'd be in
them
real
to be
trouble. They'd be in
successful.
real trouble if they were successful.
Well, and we need confidence on the part of the traveling public that they're on a safe system. And that's what this does. It just undermines the question of safety.
Does this have a problem with cars too?
Well, that
Yeah,
was
that
that
is
was
still
the first
ongoing.
picture.
I mean, that's the 7,000 series car issue. They're still running on older cars. They pulled all those out of service, and the anticipated return date is this summer.
And even this morning, there were 2 trains single tracking. I mean, it's ongoing.
Well, if you'll recall, back in 2017, 2018, we did a big governance, finance, operational review of WMATA with former USDOT Secretary Ray LaHood, and it was really done with Maryland and DC. It's what led to the capital funding. And you think about it, most of the metro system is over 40 years old. I mean, there's a lot of capital needs. There's a lot of state of good repair. They're focused on that. They've got a lot that they need to work through with the capital projects, and then really getting that safety culture where it needs to be. So,
I'm in Fredericksburg, but a lot of my residents depend on Metro. They take VREN and then it's Metro. And if you can't depend on that system, it's going to put more people back on the road, which we don't want.
Right.
It seems to me that without making a big public do about this, we need to let the word get up there. It probably already has, that we are awake down here. This this whole thing needs to be cleaned up and fixed.
I think we have an opportunity to do.
So the overlay to all of this, of course, is that the federal government required several years ago that there be an independent safety commission that oversees everything related to safety. And they actually have the power to shut the railroad down or shut the system down. Where were they in this? It's multiple failures in my view. I was really expecting that they would provide the accountability that was lacking within the system itself, but apparently not.
No, I would say they are doing that. I'm not sure so much about the certification issue, and I'm happy to dig into that a little bit more, but like they're in regular communication with me about findings. They have direct access into metro systems. So they see things that at times they see them before they're reported. And so I would say they're on top of the operational technology and seeing what's going on in the system. I'm not sure about the certification issue.
I think follow up on the certification.
I will check.
Yeah, I think somebody needs to give them a list of the 100 things to never get behind on. You know, as simple
I
as
mean,
that
that's
sounds.
pretty basic though.
Who certifies these folks?
There's a process that they've got to go through to have their train operator certified safety process.
They're
They've got to follow
internally
their own
certified.
procedures.
It's a process.
Yeah, they've got to follow their own procedures and so they're not following their own rules and training.
This to me is just remarkable. I mean, having run hospitals, we know with thousands of nurses when their license expired, and you kind of make sure they're updated before so how they don't have a system in place to track the certification is beyond my comprehension.
The liability for non-certification, the liability. Yeah,
So moving on from Wabata, a couple of other things to update you. I think last month I mentioned that we had sent out an email through Carol after the fact that we've launched an open data portal. So our 6-year program is available in a much more transparent format than what we provided previously. I said that every 6-year plan meeting we've been to over the last 3 weeks. My staff's actually accepting an award for that portal today in Indiana. We worked with a private contractor to develop that, and we are receiving an excellence award for the project's high impact value regarding return on investment and how it helps to promote internal and external transparency. So really proud of our team for working hard to get that stood up. 6-year program is just the first piece of data that's going to go on there. We're going to add ridership and a lot of other data about our programs so that it's there. And when you guys are wondering how transit ridership looks, we can tell you how car points look. We can tell you it's all out there for the public to see how we're using it. Last thing that I will mention is we are knee deep in our Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. I recruited Dr. Smoot to help us go through our merit process and our capital and operating formulas. We're required to do that every 3 years. He's been very patient with us as you've sat around the table with a bunch of transit professionals talking about performance metrics and prioritization, but we're working on making some recommendations for a CTB policy that we'll bring you this fall.
And I would say that at least it appears to me that they've done an excellent job of engaging and involving various transit systems around the Commonwealth in this process. It's not an in-house thing. We've got a bunch of people that they're actually operating these systems, participating in these rather long meetings.
They are rather long. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
We get kind of wound up on our things. So that, like I said, it's a big news day, but that kind of summarizes where we are from my perspective. We're probably going to say about the same thing, maybe a little more concise later today. Any questions before we move on? All right. Well, first up on our agenda is another one of our awesome staff members, Ciara Williams, who is our Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager. And she is going to brief you all today on the I-66 Commuter Choice Program. This is something that, for those of you who are new, we bring this to the board every 2 years about this time, which is the application of some toll money to advance transit projects in the express lane corridors in Northern Virginia.
Because we as a board have to approve it, correct?
Yes, so we have a memorandum of agreement with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. NVTC manages the process, but the final approval lies with the board, and we do that as part of our 6-year plan. So it'll come to you next month. It'll be incorporated in the 6-year plan instead of a standalone resolution, but we wanted to give you a briefing today on what those projects are.
But there will not be a separate presentation of this.
Not a separate presentation. The MOA, we've been functioning outside the MOA. The MOA says we incorporated it into the 6-year program. So that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Jen. So as Jen mentioned, I'll be going over the recommended program projects for the Commuter FY23 through 24 funding that MVTC staff will seek to advance. And then I'll also highlight some of the public involvement initiatives related to the program. Can you help me out, maybe?
I did take it.
Easy, right?
Might have to go.
Houston, we have a problem.
Miriam will take care of it.
So with that, Marion will advance to the next slide.
I hate to stop at the start, but we've got new board members. Could you kind of just give us the background on this? I think it's really important to have the context on this. Why
Yeah.
we're having this discussion, where the funding comes from, what it's intended to do.
So for this particular program, when I-66 inside the Beltway was tolled, high occupancy vehicle tolls, there was an agreement with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission to take a portion of the funding that came out of the tolls and feed that back into transit projects and other modes in the corridor to help move people in a way that they benefited from the tolls, but they didn't have to pay the tolls. And so it's an
It's a great
alternative.
construct, and
It
people
is.
got that. They understood if I'm going to
Yes.
pay, at least we're increasing mobility in the corridor for projects, just like we're going to hear about today.
So procedurally, what happens is NVTC has a technical scoring process. They gather applications, they go through a very rigorous technical scoring process. We work very closely with NVTC as they make recommendations. Before we come to you, we actually go through this list and look at them ourselves. We also review them with the Office of the Attorney General because there's legal precedent that we have to make sure that whatever we fund through this benefits the tollpayers in the corridor. And if there's not that connection, then we can't fund those types of projects. So it's a real partnership between the Commonwealth. Money comes from VDOT. So I mean, it's a real partnership between us, VDOT, and VTC. But this one is the 66 corridor. There's a little money coming out of 66 outside the Beltway that also goes into this program. The bulk of 66 outside the Beltway transit funding comes to DRPT, and we're managing that as a separate slate of projects. In the every other year thing, when we're not talking about 66, we're talking about the same thing in 95, 395. And we've seen a lot of benefit with more transit options and commuter options on the southern end of the corridor.
So some of the,
Yeah,
so some
that's
of the
great,
toll,
Jen, thank
so
you.
some of the toll money for I-66 passenger cars helps to fund this.
Yes, partnership is the word. I mean,
It is
everybody's involved, and I think it works beautifully because it fills the little gaps that would not have funding sources without a program like this.
And it's not long-term funding. I mean, it's got a process, all outlined in a very detailed MOA where, this is funding that gets you to a certain point and it trails off over time. Kate Mattice has been texting me. She's listening in this morning. They monitor performance. Projects that don't perform don't continue to get funded. So it is a success story of how we can work in partnership across the highway and the transit programs to really move the needle.
Ken, if I may, do you have an order of magnitude of the dollar amount that would come through the funding to the two different areas that you just brought forward?
So for 66 inside the Beltway, for 66 inside the Beltway and outside the Beltway, you can see on Ciara's slide, it's about $13 million that's expected over the next couple of years. I can tell you the package of projects that we brought over the past 2 years during COVID has been much, much smaller because really this program is dependent on what the revenue collections are in the 66 inside the Beltway corridor plus $5 million out of the concession agreement for 66 outside the Beltway. 395.95, that concession agreement has an annual transit investment that's part of that agreement with Transurban. That started at $15 million a year and grows at about 2.5% over 60 plus years. So it's a long-term investment on both projects.
Thank you.
Sorry, this was me giving that.
It would appear to me, correct, looking at these projects, many of them really reduce traffic on I-66.
That's
Like
like
all
all
that.
Exactly, that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
All right. We'll let you get back. It's very easy for me to slide back into my old habits, and I'll stop now.
So MVTC held a call for projects from November to January and received 11 initial applications. 9 of the 11 met eligibility requirements and they proceeded to the technical evaluation process, the results of which you see here on this slide. I do want to note that if you look on the bottom right, the box on the bottom right of this slide, it says 13.4 million expected to be available for new projects. That that number is actually 14.7 million. So there were some changes up until late last week. So unfortunately, we weren't able to edit the slides prior to the packet going out. But I will talk a little bit more about where that additional 1.4 million. So the evaluation process has a few components, and I'll highlight those briefly. First, there's the technical merit, which is 70 out of 100 points. And so that's basically how effectively does the project address the corridor improvement goals in the I-66 MOA. So to get the most possible points here, a project would efficiently move more people in its opening year, save commuters travel time relative to driving alone, connect different modes of transportation, link regional activity centers, and absorb trips that can be priced onto parallel arterials. The next one is annualized cost effectiveness, and that's 15 out of 100. So how does the technical merit score compare to the requested commuter choice funding per year of benefit that the investment would provide? And then there's applicant preference. So did the applicant identify the project as a top priority of the submittals for this funding round? And that's 10 out of 100 points. And then there's interagency collaboration. So is the project coordinated with other jurisdictions or agencies in the region? Other key elements in the program development process, funding availability. So across all 9 applications, the total funding request was 21.8 million, as you see on the bottom of the slide. In the FY23 through 24 period, MBTC currently and conservatively estimates approximately 14.7 million available to support new projects, and that's comprised of a carryover balance, a modest amount of inside the Beltway toll revenue from VDOT, outside the Beltway concessionaire payment installments, so 2 installments at 5 million, one in FY23, one in FY24. And then, as I previously mentioned, the commission this month asked MBTC staff to look closely at revenue assumptions to support as substantial of a program as possible. So MBTC was able to identify roughly 1.4 million available for programming as the current I-66 commuter project is closing out, and the project will have an unexpended balance. So that's where that additional 1.4 million comes from. So this slide just shows the staff recommended program of projects to be presented to the NBTC Commission for adoption in June. Based on the project scores and expected funding, NBTC staff are proposing a draft program that includes the 7 top scoring projects. I know on this slide it only shows 6, but as I mentioned, there's
the
additional project, which I'll talk about that shortly. So the program includes the 7 top scoring projects totaling 14.6 million, and these can be accommodated with the 14.7 million available projects. And it'll also respond to the commission's request to support a substantial program as possible. I do want to mention that NBTC staff reviewed the proposed program with the NBTC Program Advisory Committee in April and the full commission in May. And then it's going back in June for approval. So as I mentioned, can you go back to there's so what's recommended in the program. So there are 2 long-lived capital investments that would benefit I-66 commuters for decades to come and leverage over 160 million in other federal, state, and local funding. There's a continuation of 3 established commuter bus routes that are expecting rebounding ridership. 2 of these will use the outside the Beltway express lane, leading to faster and more reliable travel. There is a half-fare campaign for 5 There's a half-fare campaign for 5 OmniRide commuter routes for Western Prince William County into Arlington and DC for the first 6 months of the outside the Beltway lanes being open, and that'll also help on rebounding ridership. And then the project that's not added on the list is a critical 1-mile segment of the planned outside the Beltway I-66 trail that will provide a safe and comfortable means for cyclists and pedestrians to access the Vienna Metro rail station. So overall, that project is it's a $9 million project for which the 2.2 requested would complete funding for implementation. So I do want to mention that the overall program benefits won't change significantly with the addition of that project. In addition to the number of daily trips, MVTC for the first time looked at the projected reduction in number of daily trips. I'm sorry, looked at the projected reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and fuel savings. So in total, the recommended projects are projected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 84% and save over $2 million in annual fuel costs for commuters relative to drive alone travel. MVTC developed the VMT savings estimates for representative commute trips that would use these projects, and then applied factors from the California Life Cycle Benefit Cost Analysis Model, which is a nationally recognized tool for measuring emission reduction and fuel savings in transit projects.
So I don't think we requested this. This was something they chose to do. This should draw a round of applause from us, actually, because in addition to creating enhanced mobility, tracking the pollution reduction component of this is really critical. And so well done to all involved in that. You know, the Kate's probably listening in right now.
Kate and Ben are listening.
Yeah, and Ben, just very well done. And this is an approach that I think we should take with everything we're doing from the standpoint of our improvements, of course, and to some extent we do. In fact, you've done it this year. My congratulations to all. It's a great step in the right direction. Thank you.
Agreed.
How long ago was the $2 million number calculated?
I would say it does not reflect
I
current.
mean, I was gonna say, my guess is it might be 4 or 5 million.
Yeah, I would, they've been working on this package for a while, so I would imagine that it's not reflect.
So some additional program benefits, as you can see on the bottom of the slide, include 16 million fuel vehicle miles and 83,000 hours of delayed safety each year. MVTC also estimates that the 7 projects will account for over 4,000 daily trips.
It's a huge amount of bang for the buck.
Next slide, please. So this slide just shows MVTC's public involvement initiatives. MVTC conducted a comprehensive public comment process, which opened April 15th and actually closed yesterday evening. So for the first time, MVTC produced both English and Spanish versions of all published materials, as well as a streamlined feedback survey. As with the last couple of funding rounds, the public comment process almost fully online, including a virtual town hall ending April, with information on the program and the projects and an opportunity for the public to get answers to questions about the project.
What was the level of participation?
So when we spoke last week, there were about 80 respondents to the survey, and I think a handful of those were Spanish. And I'm sure that that has increased by now. And then these are the next steps in the process. So MVTC will be reviewing the public input received and will seek approval next month from the commission prior to seeking adoption of a project and referral to CTB for inclusion in the FY 2028. Then MVTC will distribute project agreements and implementation of funding. Funded projects may begin with the start of the fiscal year, July 1. And I do want to mention that MVTC requires quarterly progress reports and annual performance reports for active projects. So you guys will receive an update on the performance of the Commuter Choice project funded to date this October. MVTC transmits their Commuter Choice report to you guys. And with that, any other questions?
I just have one background question. What else does the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission oversee?
So their primary responsibility is to coordinate Virginia's engagement with WMATA. So the local funding, because the Commonwealth is not part of the WMATA compact. The local jurisdictions in Northern Virginia are part of the WMATA compact. And so NVTC is that conduit financially, governance, and they do a great job.
Between those local jurisdictions in Virginia?
Over the bridge.
So, yes, we're the bridge. So, and they also, I mean, beyond that, they have really the Northern Virginia Transit, it's almost a consolidator, because they actually serve as the applicant for all the local jurisdictions for our funding, manage those resources on behalf of the local jurisdictions. It makes our job easier to be able to work with one entity to do all those financial transactions. They're getting more into the technical side, technical work, and leading a regional bus electrification study. They're doing some work related to, looking at the regional bus routing in the area that we funded. Both of those things are funded in our upcoming 6-year permit.
Are they volunteers or are they full-time staff?
No, they're full-time staff. Very, very sound technical staff, much like DRPT, small and mighty. They're very good with it too. But I'm very grateful for the partnership we have with Kate and her team. Your question, and I see the question box blinking. I don't know. They received 118 comments.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ciara. All right, up next is Emily Scott, Chief of Rail, and we're gonna talk about rail plan. I know you guys ready, willing, and able.
Thank you. Are you going to do that for me or should I do it?
It's not behaving today.
Not cooperating.
Yes, excited about that.
Hi there, here to talk about rail plan. So Miriam, am I leaving you in charge of advancing slides? You're not going to stop. Real quick, we're focused on the rail plan. It's a big endeavor for us, and we've loaded a lot of extras into it this round. But we're also working on the federal grade crossing program. Our rail team is, that's a element of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so we've done an inventory of the grade crossings around the corridor, and we're anxiously awaiting the notice of funding opportunity from the Federal Railroad Administration so that we can do some crossing improvements.
Hopefully that has in favor of the acquisition west of Rome.
We are looking at the full range. Yes. In order to do a priority plan for sure. And also, you all may be familiar with the FRA's corridor identification program. That is something that we're working closely with Virginia Passenger Rail Authority on. It's a way of prioritizing corridors. These are passenger rail corridors with the FRA to qualify for some of this federal funding for rail that's coming through. So we want to make sure that as many of the passenger corridors in Virginia as possible are included there and prioritized so that the FRA has a clear idea of all the work that we've done so far to plan for adding rail service to corridors in Virginia. Okay, next slide. So at our last Rail and Transit Subcommittee meeting, the subcommittee asked about our freight plan and elements of the freight plan for the overall rail plan. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to focus on that for the beginning of my presentation and the philosophy behind our freight planning and programs at DRPT. What it boils down to, though, is a complementary network, an intermodal complementary network, that depends on all modes, not just roads, not just rail. So we all know these freight factors. These are pretty basic. These are the primary items that shippers think about when they make decisions about how freight will move. They're based on a combination of speed, cost, and also the physical needs of what's being moved. And you can think of it as convenience here. Next slide. And of course, shippers optimize their decisions based on what's being transported. And that optimum solution, or the right decision for a freight movement, can change as market conditions fluctuate. So as demand for goods ebbs and flows. And also based on the availability of various options. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of choice when there aren't very many options available. Next slide. So a favorable business climate is supported with a network of complementary transportation options. course, rail is good for bulk commodity movements, long haul movements. Truck is more about speed and last mile connections. Port, of course, international bulk finished product, and all of these work together in various ways, especially in Virginia. So ideally, there'd be a choice that can be turned on and off depending on market conditions, and businesses can reevaluate those choices. Next slide. So of course, another way to think about this is to look at the advantages of a multimodal network through resilience, looking at resilience, competition, and cost sharing. A multimodal network creates resilience. Parallel infrastructure ensures continual functionality in the event of weather related incidents, crashes, congestion, high gas prices, etc. A multimodal network creates competition. Choice increases options for businesses, drives down prices for an improved business environment. And of course, there are opportunities for cost sharing and an intermodal network, leveraging public funds with private investment. Next slide. So this builds up to all this information that you all are probably familiar with, builds up to our plan for freight rail in Virginia that will be reflected in the rail plan. So we've created our program guidance and freight planning efforts in order to achieve these core tenets of a functioning multimodal network. We target resilience through port expansion projects that are made possible with our freight program guidelines, and state of good repair with our rail preservation program. We target competition by increasing business access to the rail network and increasing capacity to drive competition. We target cost sharing by requiring a match to our public funds, ensuring efficient implementation by the private sector who are responsible for maintenance and operations. And Mike Todd is our programs director. He's not with us today, but you hear from him quite a bit when we have rail industrial access presentations and other programs related items. And he broke down the different programs that we have into these categories, and I can go through them and kind of go through the investment levels to show how we're achieving these goals through the rail plan. So resilience, yes.
You got a guess.
Progress.
Yeah, I'm sure there are contracts that have no hammer drills during the day. So how we can achieve these, actually, this is I guess a common refrain when we have these discussions. But like you today, to the extent that you can, is tell us about the measurements that you can provide that give us an indication of what direction we're moving in some of the most critical aspects of the rail system. We've talked about this before, but I understand generally where we're moving with this, but I think for those of us that see this on a very infrequent basis and need to make determinations as to whether we're being successful or not, having simple to understand metrics as a starting page on this is really, really helpful. And that can start with things as simple as what's our total mileage of active rail in the Commonwealth? What was it for the last 2 measured periods that we did this?
Right.
What are the number of active sidings that we have? How many cars do we originate in Virginia? What's the total tonnage of originated traffic? What's the through traffic? I mean, 10 or 15 statistics that'll tell us, yeah, most of those arrows are green, or some of them are yellow, or some of them are red. But we need those kind of simple metrics because this conceptually is really good, but it's really hard to take that and apply it to our current situation. We have funding streams, we have advocacy programs, we have any number of things that we do, but how do we assess the effectiveness of those if we don't have those basic
If it
metrics?
could be a little more granular, and I agree with Scott, I think having that at the front end would be very.
First page.
helpful.
Okay,
Tell us where we're going.
sure.
And that is something that we could then put on our open data
I
portal
think it'd be really,
Exactly.
and
really
have as kind of
Exactly.
a regular data point that
Right.
the public can.
A citizen goes to that right away. It's like, I know this is making a difference.
there you go, green arrows up.
Right.
Yeah. So from a communications perspective, we can put those things in that show we're doing a good job. I'd also suggest, I did have a chance to look at several other states' rail plans. There's some good models out there for what others have done kind of identify the basics. Maybe we could take that and, take best practices and make that our lead sheet or sheets.
Sure, I'd love to catch up with you on that, to see which ones you were were impressive. And I will say that for those of you all who were here last month, I started out with some data and our story map approach, and I have a couple slides on that when we continue. And so that data element is definitely there. I wanted to take a step back and talk about our philosophy a little bit, about the investments also, but having that combined is really going to tell the full story. So I appreciate it.
And if I could add one more thing, Emily and I met with the EDP, their executive director and their team a couple weeks ago to try to strengthen the tie so that we can be a better partner with them for rail-ready sites and, kind of tee up some things for them instead of them coming to us or an industry coming to us, being more strategic in how we come to you for investments in rail infrastructure. And so that's something you'll see reflected in the rail plan when we bring it to you later this year, and that you'll see in how we interact with the board going forward in making those recommendations to you.
Jennifer, if I may, while we're looking at the metrics, and I think it's a very sound program to be able to do that and focus on it, can we at some point in time get an idea of where this department effectively is looking within the IIJA on what things we're asking for that are priorities in terms of funding, recognizing we have a need? Where are we aggressively going forward to look for those dollars from the federal standpoint in terms of what's available?
I think that's a great question. It's something that we're working on in partnership with BPRA, and DJ and Mike are here. We're working very closely, supporting each other as we pursue different aspects of the IIJA funding support. But yeah, we can definitely come back. I think the best way to do that is to do it together.
I would definitely recommend that we do it together.
I have a question. I found on your previous slide with respect to competition and choice. Could you explain that? Because the rail system, I know there's not much competition. It's a monopoly, and you have to pick the carrier you want, and you're stuck with that carrier. So I want to know how it's competitive and where the choice comes from.
So a complementary multimodal network provides a choice between truck and rail, ideally. And so, and also in our investments in the rail industry, in particular in Virginia, have resulted in more choice, albeit it is limited for the reasons that you mentioned. At the port, there wasn't always access by both railroads. So many of the projects that we partnered with the port on have been aimed at offering competition. And of course, our short line partners with Rail Preservation Fund offer competition. They can offer some last mile connections, and some of them connect to both Norfolk Southern and CSX. So through that program, that bolsters that competition element. Competition at the port in Richmond is something that we're striving for. So that there is some competition in there, but I understand what you're saying. You're kind of, whatever railroad is right there at the industry is usually the one that you're going to have to go with if you go with rail.
But a big part of the competition is getting the freight onto rail to start with instead of on trucks.
Yes.
And getting it off of the highway network is a big part of it.
That's really the competition we're talking about.
Yes, road versus rail. Not to put them against each
Not
other. There are always
We're working in partnership.
Yeah, there are advantages to different modes at different times, and so having that choice is huge.
Well, and I have to highlight, there's also significant imbalance in capacity when we talk about, not to highlight one over the other. I drove down this morning, sat in an accident outside of Fredericksburg for about 15 or 20 minutes. And as the traffic broke free, I'm surrounded by tractor trailers, almost exclusively. I was in the right lane. And as we went further down the road in this cluster of tractor trailers, I noticed that the Norfolk and Southern dual line railway below had no trains on. I don't think I've ever seen a train on that. So the capacity imbalance is something we need to be focused on. And we're not choosing rail over truck, but we really don't have significant additional capacity in our interstate highway system and our primaries for more truck traffic. Mr. Johnson often quotes the 2.5% growth in truck traffic per year. That's an FHWA number. The comparable automobile traffic increase is less than 1%. So we're moving much faster in a direction of clogging our roadways with tractor trailers while we have a rail network that sits well under.
Yeah, but what, that's Norfolk Southern. Why aren't they going after the business? What are we missing here?
I will say what I've often said in this situation. It needs to be a public-private partnership that stimulates more investment and that creates opportunities that have long-term financial benefits with a degree of assurance that those railroads don't have currently. So we have often acted more as adversaries to the major rail lines in the Commonwealth rather than partners. So the question, I guess in my mind, what's the game-changing plan that will allow us to develop long-term relationships with railroads that'll change that dynamic? This is a good plan. It's kind of business as usual. We don't have any big,
No innovation.
there's no big ideas in here about how we shift that paradigm and how we actually put more of this on rail.
Well, from my perspective, railroads have to step up their more customer service oriented, and being a monopoly is kind of a contradictory complement. Part of the Long Beach problem ended in the Midwest, where they had containers sitting in rail yards for days and weeks in some cases before they could get them offloaded. Well, customers aren't going to wait days and weeks. The supply chain was all messed up. So they chose trucks because they were more efficient to get it delivered. So rail typically is not efficient. It's not convenient.
I think there's other considerations there when we say it's not efficient but convenient. It's very efficient from the standpoint of fuel use. And it can be very efficient from the standpoint of transporting bulk commodities.
Customers are interested in that when they're considering empty shelves.
Understand there's goods that may be optimized by being transported by truck. But we are fast approaching a limitation in truck capacity on our roadways.
Well, there's no question. I agree 100% with you. We need to get trucks off the road, but the rail lines have to step up their game.
And so I was going to say, if we could try to figure out how to pull this back together. So we're in the middle of the rail plan, and this isn't the final. This is just where we are. So I just want to make sure that this is good feedback. That's why we're here. That's why Emily's presenting, is to get this from you so that what we work on between now and the end of the year does the things that you as a board see.
Yeah, I just have one more comment. Always one more. The rail industry that we're talking about is private industry. They have a CEO and they have a board of directors that are focused on one thing: operating ratios and profit. And so we need to acknowledge that in the context of what we hope to do with them in the future. And a large part of any entree that we might have to them needs to be about helping them not only improve the reliability of their profit, but making certain that we become partners. We do in other public-private partnerships to ensuring that they have a better bottom line 10 to 15 years from now if we cooperate on a program. So left alone as a private sector service provider, they're going to do what's best for their bottom line. The only way to modify that is for the Commonwealth to engage, or a series or a combination of southeastern states, and create, very much like we have in Northern Virginia, a consolidated effort to try to work interstate to get trucks off the roadway and on rail. And that would mean perhaps supporting investment for intermodal facilities and new track facilities. It's a very different approach than we take today.
Well, and everything that we're talking about, we need to do in concert with the port.
Of course.
And, that obviously a lot of the projects that are in our program are supporting the port. And the more we can build that tie and support the movement of goods out of Hampton Roads to other parts of the state, whether that's using existing rail, that's more intermodal connections, or inland ports, or whatever you want, transload facilities, whatever you want to look at. I mean, I think that engagement with the port helps us move the needle as much as any individual business or.
And I think Scott's comments are also on target, because I think it's not just the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is regional.
You've got to coordinate with those.
Like we were on the road coming down this morning, and those trucks didn't start in Virginia.
Oh, no.
They didn't start in the port. They're coming from throughout the northeast corridor.
That's right.
So if I may, we've talked about tractor trailers and we've talked about the railroad. One thing we haven't really talked about is what happens if you look at the European model and look at short sea shipping. In other words, if we're going to build if we're going to have vessels to be able to take from the major container lines that are coming into Hampton Roads with the new, the dredging and the 55-foot channel and the port facilities that we have a limited amount of focus on how we can get those tractor trailers out of the port as the port continues to grow in competition with Charleston and Savannah and New York and what have you. And it would seem to me that we might want to take a look at how we, in our program of getting the trucks off the roads, might look to develop a completely new transportation system that doesn't currently exist anywhere in the United States, other than possibly on the Mississippi River, moving barges.
Mm-hmm.
But you could easily, I'd say easily, you'd have to build ships. To build ships, you'd have to build them in the United States. And to operate them, to go from US port to US port, you'd have to have American crews. It'd be a huge opportunity for the shipbuilding industry and jobs to be able to build the ships. You probably do like what they did in World War II, which is basically have a particular design to be built to whatever kind of power, whether it's diesel or whether it's natural gas. You could do it with natural gas. It's expensive, but looking at 2.5% a year expansion with trucks on the highways and induced demand, we can't build out any further to be able to allow more roads. We just can't find a way, one, with the dollars, and two, even if we do that, they're automatically 100% packed in. So we may be at a crossroads of taking a hard look at an alternative, which is very effective in Europe and very functional. And we could, at one point in time, I took a look at some of this on the East Coast, and there's another group that was looking at doing this on the West Coast, going from LA up to as far north as into Seattle by doing short sea shipping, basically a 300, 400, or 500 foot ship in length that drew maybe 32 feet that would be able to take containers from, example, Hampton Roads and take them to Baltimore, so you don't have another ship in the middle of the channel up here aground. But needless to say, it's possible, and they do it very effectively in Europe.
It was a fairly good barge system. I don't know what the numbers are, but I mean, there's barge traffic moving every week between Baltimore and Norfolk. And so an expansion of that, but these ships are getting bigger, the ports of call are getting fewer.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, something that would be a big help in trying to get some of the trucks off the road and not depending solely on rail to move the containers.
And there's barge and small ship traffic that comes up the James River to the border
Yes.
as well. If we could, I mean, this is a great conversation, but if we could get back to where Emily is with her slide deck, because I think we could talk philosophically about that probably for the rest of the day, but.
And time-wise, I'm wondering, because we have, what are we running up against? How much time?
Just keep going. There is not a 10 o'clock committee.
Yeah, so okay, I'll just keep going then. And one thing to remember, so I would love to be able to work on a big game-changing freight project. I want to do that. What our programs are designed for in Virginia right now is to, and it's been like this for passenger and for freight for a long time. Passenger has gone on to another realm, obviously, which is wonderful. But we do a lot of incremental projects to move the needle. And I like the idea of having that green and red to show how over the years we've chipped away and increased mode share. That's a great thing. One story though that I want to tell you, and you all may be familiar with this. So the Port of Virginia, when we had a supply chain issue around the beginning of the year where the West Coast ports were clogged up, like you were mentioning. Our port in Virginia was able to stay operating and actually take a lot of freight that would have gone to West Coast ports, and rail picked it up and moved it to the middle of the country. So I feel like these incremental improvements that we've made over the years in port expansion, state of good repair, business access, network capacity, all of these things on this list have gotten us to a point where incrementally we've been able to increase capacity and really weather the storm, literally and figuratively, and be more resilient. So, so I want to look for those big projects, and the IIJA presents a really great opportunity for that. Got lots of ideas.
That's our game changer.
And having transload facilities will really help with that barge access. So I'd like to look at that, and it takes partnerships with the railroads. It takes partnerships with the shippers and the port in order to really create those plans. We do have I'm putting in a plug for the Freight Advisory Committee that meets once a quarter. Their next meeting is June 6th. In Norfolk, and Scott Casbooks is coming, which I'm very happy about, and so we have a forum, and fortunately we're going to be able to meet in person. We haven't met in person since this group started, but a couple of times to talk about issues like that. So anyway,
Keep the labor negotiations on the West Coast in your mind too, because I don't think that's going to turn out well. They might see some more freight coming to Norfolk.
Right. So I'm going to move through this since it's more of the same, but the rest of the slides in this section give you dollar amounts for each one of these categories that are important to that overall philosophy that we talked about. But
what are the categories?
Okay,
What's
so
that to?
So the categories that the investments that support resilience, port expansions obviously support resilience. Like I talked about just now, as we weathered the storm through that supply chain crunch. And so this gives you an idea of the investments that are in our 6-year improvement program and our long-range program for those different categories. And then state of good repair is mainly through our rail preservation program, investments of upward to $100 million in our plan right now throughout Virginia, with 70% public funds, and then the private match. And we spend a lot of time on guidance and scoring for these projects to make sure that we are using the state's funds responsibly, and we work closely with those grantees.
So the state of good repair highways, or is that rail state of good
It's
repair?
rail state of good repair. Yes, and the rail preservation program really, it targets critical infrastructure improvements for short line railroads.
And what do the acronyms stand for?
Sure, so.
NIG, BIP, Virginia.
Oh, sorry, so those are port facilities, so Norfolk International Terminals,
Okay.
yeah. So,
And then port.
thank you.
And what else? VIG.
Virginia
Gateway.
International Gateway.
Yes.
That's the big
That's
facility over.
the one
That's
that
the thing.
formerly was Maersk
Right.
over in Portsmouth.
Yes.
Mhm.
Ultimately, there's about a billion two that's been put into the Virginia International Gateway over about 10 to 12 years, building out that facility.
So next slide, competition, oh, we're there. All right, so, and then these are the grant programs that target competition. We can give them, I mean, I think that they all kind of help with all of these categories, but we're just breaking things down in terms of dollars. Business access is mainly through the Rail Industrial Access Program. And of course, we have quite a bit of VDP coordination. And just so that you all know, in that meeting that we had with VDP a couple weeks ago, they've got lots of additional funding, upward to $150 million in sites and buildings development funding that is a game changer for them. And they've hired some people to work on site development throughout the state. And so we are getting in on the ground floor, working with them to make sure that we're developing rail served sites and really targeting industries that could make that mode shift or could make more of rail access. So we're excited to be working with them. And then network capacity is really targeted through our freight program, and we have $127 million associated with that program in our long range plan. Next slide. And one thing to think about with these grants and programs that we have where we work with private industry, you know, rail operators take care of they're 100% responsible for their maintenance and operations, unlike the road network. So investments that we make in freight rail in Virginia, our capital outlay is a maximum of 70%, and it's for those capital projects. It's for additional capacity. And so that's an important thing to look at when you're thinking about road infrastructure funding and rail infrastructure funding. We're really maximizing that public-private partnership. And then, of course, efficient implementation. The Commonwealth, when we're working on these freight rail projects, we're not part of the liability. We don't actually implement the projects. We work very closely to make sure that progress is being made and the funds are being spent wisely and on the project that's assigned. And we have that public cost not to exceed in our guidelines. Next slide. And so I'm going to zip through these. This is some of the information that I started showing in the last meeting. This is an example of our story map approach to this year's plan, so that you can really dig into the data more like a website than actually a huge volume for a rail plan. And this can help. It will help us and help VEDP and other partners to look at what opportunities are out there in terms of commodity flows and where we can piggyback on existing industries and really target those yellow areas where there's existing freight access through the railroad network, and there are businesses that are that have clusters that use rail and that could expand to use more rail. So I'm going to keep on going. We won't show any videos, but if you'd like to look at any of the preview of the plan, please let me know. I'll move on to this project identification and how we're measuring benefits. So part of the state rail development, we aggregated proposed projects from a variety of sources, both the 6-year improvement program, transforming rail in Virginia, passenger rail projects, short line freight projects, and we developed a long range investment program to outline the type of investments and improvements that are planned for both passenger and freight rail. So in total, we identified 174 proposed projects across the state with a total dollar value of $5.8 billion. And it's worth noting that some long-term projects, the cost estimate hasn't been developed, so this number is certainly bigger than what we see here. We're being conservative with our estimate.
Is this the 6 years? This is within the 6-year period?
This is both long and short term.
So it's beyond the 6-year plan.
Right. Right, we're asked by FRA. FRA has guidelines for this rail plan. They want us to use a 20-year horizon. And we've identified short term as 6 years. So 6-year improvement program is
so it's an unconstrained plan. The only part that's constrained is the short term that aligns with the 6-year plan.
Right.
So 227 million and the 4.4 billion, those in the 6-year plan.
Is that correct?
I think so, but there may be some projects that are not. So let me get back to you.
That's okay.
The passenger
I think
rail,
so.
that's in the neighborhood.
But I can double check.
That's fine.
Okay. So, and then the breakdown by types of projects, short-term versus long-term, is in that table. Next slide. And so some of the maps that we'll be showing where we'll identify where those projects are, and they're not static. So these are what's nice about this rail plan is that you'll be able to navigate through it and distill those projects that are in your district and that you're most interested in, so you don't have to sift through all of them. Yes.
Just a comment. I know it's really hard to separate projects that benefit rail from freight, but so much of what we're doing in the, passenger from freight, so much of what we're doing in the passenger side will have huge freight benefits as well, especially in the 95 corridor. So we break them out by dollars that we have provided for those programs, but for the railroads, the benefits that come from our passenger improvements are also quite significant to their freight.
That's a good point. So next slide. So the impacts of identified projects are, we're also required to do a benefit cost analysis of our entire plan of projects, both short-term and long-term. And so we are in the process right now of estimating the societal benefits and economic impacts of the proposed project improvements. Here we're outlining some of the benefit cost analysis metrics and economic impact analysis, economic impacts that we're currently estimating for all freight and passenger projects. The results of the analysis will be available in the story map as well. And so that is a good point to measure the benefits to freight of our passenger rail program. Most of the benefit cost analysis metrics are associated with diverting people from highways to rail, while the economic impact analysis it's based on the estimated spending of rail projects in Virginia. So how that stimulates the economy. Yes, sir?
Do you have these appear to be mostly for passenger rail? Do you have similar metrics for freight rail, like amount of cargo that is moved from trucks to rail through the rail plan?
Yes, we'll be touching on that as well. Absolutely. And those are items that are also collected, grant by grant when we do a benefit cost analysis for each one of our grant awards. Next slide, please. So another element of the rail plan is our passenger rail service development plan. And we partner, of course, very closely with Virginia Passenger Rail Authority on that. And we also partner with Amtrak, North Carolina. And also we remain consistent with the Southeast Rail Corridor Commission plan as well. And for those of you all who aren't familiar, the Southeast Rail Corridor Commission is a group that Jen DeBrule, our director, sits on with a number of other states in the Southeast, including DC. And this group is, looking at opportunities for federal funding and has developed some long-range strategic plans for building our rail capacity throughout the Southeast and connecting it to the Northeast. So next slide. So here's a graphic of the new and potential service, the state-supported service with additional frequencies, new rail service that's programmed already, and corridors that we've studied in the last few years. This rail plan includes some of those General Assembly studies that we have done recently, like the Commonwealth corridor that goes across the state from Hampton Roads down to the New River Valley, and also that Bristol study that looks at the feasibility of extending rail to Bristol from New River Valley.
Sorry, one more question.
Yes.
On the dotted line here, it says program. Does that mean it's going to happen? Or it means it's just an idea that looks feasible?
Programmed means that it
is committed to occur. Okay. Thank you.
Well, what's the schedule for the Petersburg Raleigh line? Is that actually progress, or is that way off in the future sometime?
So they're doing the survey work right now as you speak, and I'm going to be showing the progression of all of the service in the next few slides. But we do have Mike McLaughlin and DJ Sadler from VPRA here as well, who might be able to fill us in a little bit more.
I'm happy to address that. We're actually working with North Carolina DOT and Amtrak. We have 2 federal grants and a Chrissy grant city grant to bring the Raleigh to Richmond corridor 30% design. We are contemplating further IIJA grants to bring that to final design. that, as some of you may know, when we, part of the Transform Around Virginia agreements that Emily's alluded to, passenger trains, trucks off the road, we purchased the S line from Petersburg to just across the border in North Carolina. That portion does not have current rail. So I'm just trying to set expectations to one of the questions asked, what's planned, what's programmed. We would still, track still needs to be laid. From there, from Norlina roughly to Raleigh, it is active track. North Carolina DOT is working with CSX. That's not private knowledge. They actually received a huge federal grant, fishing grant to do that. So all this is saying that plans are working forward. I should note though that CSX did not own all of the old rail bed does not currently own, did not own the Southern Cross old rail bed from Petersburg to North Carolina. So there's still some private property that we need to be negotiated with, which Emily knows full well about because she hears from them.
And Mike, is it also true to say, since there's no rail in the corridor, that there's implications for VDOT's highway network around that corridor as well? Rail line.
Yes, it's actually, if you look on a satellite map, you can see the old rail bed, but there's no track lay. So there have been some structures that could have been constructed, if that's what you're referring to, in the last 40 years or so. There's also, in fact, we know there are some buildings and so on and so forth, and probably some VDOT. I don't know if there are VDOT structures. I know there are buildings. That would actually reduce service, reduce the time between Raleigh and Richmond by up to an hour and a half. And we should also note it would benefit the Hampton Roads area because the Norfolk trains, as some people might know, come up to the Petersburg area and then go north. And a large part of that 30% design, hopefully final design, will improve that track north of there, including at Appomattox River. We'd like to get trains into Main Street to improve the James River Bridge. Just if you look out the window, it's just half a mile, less than a mile from here. So the way of saying there's a lot of plans moving forward. And we already mentioned IJ is a game changer, and all the parties are looking at that to possibly help fund, design, and future construction, not just to get trains to North Carolina, but help trains North Carolina.
So this will be both freight and passenger.
We have the right in our agreement with CSX. We have the rights to have this as a passenger only corridor. However, if freight is run out, CSX has the right of first refusal. So the answer to your question is not yet determined. We can go, this is the one corridor, we can go up to 110 miles per hour. Whereas the maximum achievable speed on AS on the other corridors is 90 miles per hour, which actually fits with the curves. People who know the RFP, there's a lot of quick anyway.
Mike, is this the standard 66-foot right away for traditional railroads?
A lot of the property lines, the S line have reverted to be, so that's why we're doing a survey. Emily mentioned the survey. We're still trying to figure out what the survey boundaries are. It's, we know in the RFP it's 100 feet. That's why we can go to 4 tracks from DC to Richmond. We're still trying to figure out what the right of way available on the Petersburg, North Carolina side.
So without a schedule having been set for this, let's say, I mean, is this something we should think about? Is 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What do you think?
At least 10 plus years. Since track is not laid, we just need to be honest and set proper expectations. I can tell you though that North Carolina and Amtrak see this as the next Long Bridge, meaning this is another bottleneck. Now that Long Bridge is funded and well into 15% design, environmental is done, this is the next bottleneck from getting the Northeast corridor, that service level, if you will, down to the southeast, because it's not competitive right now. The Raleigh to Richmond trains are not competitive with the railroad, because you got to go straight south and you kind of actually cut back to the northwest. Whereas this is a diagonal along I-85.
Mike, is that 10 years based on availability of funding or just the sheer time required to get this project?
I think it could be both, but the sheer time, just having been in the rail industry for a while, it's the environmental planning, the property acquisitions already mentioned, the laying of the track, the structures are always a big deal. It's not laying the track is a lot easier than laying the structures over roads that Jen alluded to, in over bodies of water. Those structures are, as we learned on the RFP, whether it be Long Bridge or the Neabsco Creek Bridge or the Occoquan Bridge, the Rappahannock Bridge, and also the Fredericksburg those are ones that take quite some time and can impact the local environment.
We also had bridges to contend with on that line.
We're looking into that with that survey work. We'll have more information. I know Director Rich was here earlier. I don't know if you know that, but that's bridges. You say road bridges and rail?
I'm talking about really rail bridges.
Well,
Probably as many as there are on Beeline.
And-
Let me just repeat what Mike said, because I don't know. This will not be done in 2025.
Please, thank you,
I've got some maps that show just the trajectory or.
I like that. Let's be clear.
Yes.
It just throughout 10 years. Be very clear.
If anybody wants to get a really detailed look at the S line, we do have an environmental impact statement. It's old, but it's valid and yes. When I started, it was still going on, but we do have a record of decision. It's going to require some updates and obviously VPRA is doing the hard work that, to continue that effort through and that survey. But it's a lot of work.
Sorry, I had to throw that question out because when I was in Richmond District, I just there's some of the flooring down there, some places that were filled in instead of bridged. And
so we can go on to the next slide. So this is a series of maps. There's subway maps that show the trajectory of service increases as we envision them now, year by year. And it's a combination of so this is the service that we can anticipate as a result of the Transforming Rail in Virginia deal, the Western Rail Initiative included, and other service commitments, not just Transforming Rail in Virginia, but other service commitments from federal records of decision associated with DC to RVA, that environmental impact statement, Richmond to Raleigh environmental impact statement, and also the Hampton Roads Tier 1 environmental impact statement. So we have lines, gray lines across indicating station locations instead of dots, because we're anticipating that there may be some express service depending on what demand there is, and looking at dispatching trains so that they're most efficient based on what the needs are. So this is our look in 2019. So a couple of years ago, and we can move on to 2021, 2022. We see that second train to Roanoke being added. We see the addition of the service down to Richmond Main Street Station, which was announced in 2021. We also see an additional Norfolk train during that time frame. And we can move on to the next slide. So in this slide, we're looking at 2026, and we're anticipating that both of those Roanoke trains come down to New River Valley then. This is very exciting. And also an additional train, it's all here. An additional train to Main Street Station, and then an additional train to Newport News in 2026. And then phase 2 completion for Transforming Rail in Virginia brings us a lot more service down to Main Street Station, an additional 3 trains there. And then we can move on to 2030 plus. So 2030 plus is when we start moving more trains over to Main Street Station. So some of those trains now that only stop at Staples Mill can now stop in the city of Richmond. Because we're anticipating that the improvements in the Richmond area would make that possible. And then, so you see that for 2030 plus. And then 2040 is where we get into some of those additional trains going south, and we don't have things finalized in terms of whether which of those trains would end up going to Hampton Roads and which ones would go to North Carolina. But we know that we have that capacity, and we'll be working with VPRA obviously as the years go by to figure out where the demand is and how to fill needs. And then the full build out, which is the next slide, shows that all the trains going south would have access to Main Street Station. So even the longer distance trains would have access to Main Street Station, which is really exciting. And I mean, it just allows it to fulfill its full potential. I mean, that's the reason it's there. That's the reason we put investments into it. So.
Yeah, I made the comment because I was considering taking the train down this morning. You can't. unless you want to say, well, no, this broader plan, I'm so excited. This is what we need to be going.
Soon.
Very soon.
FRA's Southeast High-Speed Rail program, as it was originally envisioned, is a capital to capital, downtown to downtown plan. That is the point. And there is definitely a time and a place for suburban stations. Staples Mill is our #1 most used station in the Commonwealth and in the South. But it will be great when we can get more trains downtown, for sure.
So in the plans and nothing about Bristol, that's not even 24.
That is not part of a NEPA decision, and it hasn't been part of an agreement with the railroad yet. So
But you didn't help Beth Reinhardt.
So go back, can we go back to the overall map? Because you keep going back
Always in the maps.
to the map.
that
That one.
This one.
So you do see Bristol on there in purple. And, that's a corridor that we've, studied and we've committed to continue to working on that corridor. Really, to make that corridor work, we need to be working in partnership with Tennessee, which we are doing, but that needs a destination beyond Bristol.
And I want to make the distinction between the rail plan and the service development plan. They're really two different things. The rail plan is something that we're doing based on FRA guidelines. And this is our rail plan. It shows all of the projects that we're contemplating unrestrained. The service development plan is more about what have we agreed to? What do we have formal contracts associated with, like records of decision associated with environmental impact statements and agreements with railroads and Amtrak and Weir.
And what is NCS versus NTA? Is that North Carolina Central?
So A line versus S line. So the S line is that line, the S line is the line that goes through Main Street Station and has that direct 1.5 hour time savings down to Raleigh. And then the A line is the one that goes to the west around
Like towards Asheville?
Richmond. Yeah, it's the one that's on 195. It's co-located with 195 going through Richmond. So right now, the trains that go south are on the A line. And that's why they don't stop at Main Street Station. And so eventually we'd like to develop the S line so that they can stop at Main Street Station and we get the advantage of a quicker trip to Raleigh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions for Emily?
Oh, and I do have a next steps.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, but I'm finished with the about the real thing. So we are taking a little bit more time with this rail plan. We have a lot of add-ons that are not required by FRA, working on policy statements. Also, this service development plan is something that we committed to with Virginia Passenger Rail Authority to look at the super future of passenger rail service, and also added on that Commonwealth corridor study. So we're working right now on reviewing the refined policy statements, which we've gotten some input from you all on, and we'll come back to you with. As I mentioned, we're doing that benefit cost analysis. In the summer, we hope to have a preview and really be able to show you something that you can review and critique a little bit more than some of the in the works information we've given so far, and have some virtual outreach meetings. And then we hope to finalize the rail plan in the fall.
I had one question. In terms of planning for rail, if one of the goals is to reduce truck traffic, to move it to rail, it seems to me that one of the things that we would need to do is to create what I would call subnodes, where there can be destinations along the rail line where you can unload cargo. Because I heard the discussion about the ships, but I just think practically, by the time you load a ship in Boston and then get it to Norfolk, and then unload it and get on a rail and send it to Richmond Inland Port, I bet you what, the trucks can be more efficient, even though that might be a little bit cheaper, but it's going to take a long time to do that. But if you had subnodes, it would allow freight freight to be dispatched along the way, it just seems like that would be a motivation for people to start using rail more. You're not going to eliminate trucks, but you don't have to have a truck that goes all the way up to Boston or New York, but you have trucks that maybe go to Harrisburg, PA, because they're going to send stuff, west and south.
You need more rail yards rather than hubs that can get congested.
Right.
And inefficient.
That's right. And so that's what we are looking at. And, that incremental approach that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, those nodes that you're describing aren't necessarily huge facilities. They're targeted and sometimes they can even be industry specific. And I heard a talk, I think it was at the governor's transportation conference in the fall. The head of Norfolk Southern, the head of the port, Stephen Edwards, was talking about the upcoming IIJA funds and what he would do if he had federal money to do anything. And he said he would build transload facilities up and down the interstate corridors for just that purpose. And so while, one big new intermodal inland port is something that maybe we could strive for, it could be something that's scalable, something that could start small, get bigger. A series of intermodal facilities may be the way to go. And so it's going to take a lot of work with industry, with railroads, with the Freight Advisory Committee, I think, but we're looking for those opportunities.
Can I follow on that thought? You've actually kind of characterized, I guess, the idea of how we get to the big idea on this. And part of it is there needs to be a planning effort that's really outside of the way we operate at the RPT. And so I didn't mean to suggest that you should have had this part. Please, but my question is infrastructure money available for that type of major planning effort?
I think so.
We have some consultant budgets that, and maybe we could look into some of those.
Talk about
things.
IIJA.
Oh, IIJA, to develop an application.
No, to develop a major,
develop the concept.
yes,
Okay, I
a
know what you're
25,
talking about.
50-year
Okay,
plan that
yes.
really incorporates
There is.
what's happening with our highway system, what's our current state of rail, what are the big ideas that would blend these together and give us the optimum utilization of both. I mean, that's what we lack in this, and everybody's doing their job very diligently and effectively, but it's a big questions that we're facing.
Yeah,
And the clock is running while we're doing it.
further to that point, that the passenger rail plan is very strategic. The freight rail plan is largely not.
Right. It's a great comparison.
The major corridors freight traffic are Interstate 95 and Interstate 81. Just coincidentally, both of those corridors have a well-developed rail system within somewhere between 0 and 10 miles of them all the way through the state. So what are we going to do about that, if anything? I mean, there's nothing in here that speaks to any substantive projects as we have the passenger rail. I think we're missing an opportunity to not be, as you say, the major projects. Well, what are they?
Yeah,
And there are none in freight rail that show up in this plan.
But I think it would start with quantifying the issues first, contextualize. And as you've said, that's an important
Goes
part of
back
it.
to the metrics.
What-
That's where we started the conversation.
That's where we need to start with this. And then from there, you can build the what ifs and what are the grand plans that might help to create this balance that we're talking about. Agree completely.
And one thing I think we could do a better job with is, we talk about these projects, they're for the port, they're for rail preservation, but you guys don't get to, we need to have some more information about what's happening on the ground, I think, some more case studies, because there are projects, major, minor, it's more about the result in my mind, but we could be talking about those more.
All right, so I think I've got a long list, Emily's got a long list, we hear you. So we've got more work to do on the freight side, to marry that into and make it more consistent strategically with the passenger rail.
If I could ask specifically,
Sure.
I'd love to hear, and it doesn't have to be in the very near term, how we get to the point that we have the information and the resources to look at the big ideas on the freight rail side. I mean, commissioners sitting back there, who could probably tell us in a year when we're going to run out of highway capacity based on the expansion of truck traffic on the roadways. Those are things, and I say that not facetiously, those are things that need to be incorporated into this big plan. That, you know, the situation's urgent from my perspective.
Understood. All right, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the questions. This is great.
I'm going to confirm with Sheila, we have nobody signed up for public comment. So with that, commissioners here, we need to have a brief conversation with the board, but the subcommittee is adjourned. So if you guys could just stay put for a second. Get everybody else on in here.
With the CTB board.
CTB, you guys.